Every character in Silent Hill 2 has a tragic backstory, but there might not be one more profoundly heartbreaking than Angela Orosco's. In her childhood, Angela suffered horrors beyond imagining at the hands of her father and brother, and now wanders the streets of Silent Hill in search of her mother. Through Angela and her traumatic past, the player gains deeper insight into the journey of James, gets a glimpse at his multifaceted personality, and develops a better understanding of the inner workings of Silent Hill. James encounters Angela for the first time in the graveyard outside of Silent Hill, in the opening minutes of the game. She's startled by his sudden appearance, and who wouldn't be? They might not be in the town proper, but the entire region is coated in Silent Hill's trademark fog. Later in the game, however, her reaction to James right here will take on an entirely different context. James asks Angela for directions to Silent Hill, and though she does tell him which way to go, she does so cautiously, warning him to stay away and telling him that there's something wrong with the town beyond just the fog. On the surface, this is a traditional horror trope. A character in a graveyard warning the protagonist to stay away from the place that we, the player, know they must inevitably go is about as classic as it gets. At the same time, we can also infer at this early point in the game that Angela has a greater level of familiarity with the inner workings of the town than James does. Perhaps she's already encountered a monster, seen one from a distance, or experienced a horrible reminder of her past that clued her into the town's dark nature. This is all just speculation, of course, but she does seem to allude to it with her next line. She responds with a maybe when asked if the town is dangerous, and says that it's hard to explain. Which is true. Even for the audience, most Silent Hill games are the type of thing that you have to experience for yourself with controller in hand to fully understand. When James isn't fazed by Angela's warning and decides to follow her directions into town, Angela blurts out that she isn't lying. This, much like her startled reaction to James at the beginning of the conversation, can be interpreted far differently later on. But even here, it's clear that she's used to people not believing in her, used to people ignoring and writing off her words. James, in turn, explains that it doesn't really matter to him if the town is dangerous. He's looking for someone. Though he doesn't tell her about Mary specifically, Angela is much more forthcoming. She shares that she's looking for her mother, and that she thought her father and brother were here too. Here in the moment, this establishes James and Angela as kindred spirits, two lost souls looking for loved ones lost in the fog of Silent Hill. Though their personal narratives and trauma are entirely different, their journeys will intersect and play off of one another time and time again over the course of this game, and the first of these moments is right here in the graveyard. At the same time, with the benefit of hindsight, this conversation also sheds light on the delusional mindset of both characters at this point in the game. James thinks his wife has been gone for 3 years, and Angela thinks her father and brother are still alive. As we'll find out down the line, neither of these things are true. This is all part of how Silent Hill works, how it toys with those summoned to the town by manipulating their past and setting them up to believe things that can't possibly be true, all in the name of forcing them to confront their trauma. James's second meeting with Angela is the first of several harrowing and heartbreaking encounters with her. He finds her on the floor of room 109 in Blue Creek Apartments, staring at the mirror and stabbing at the carpet with a knife. After a quick reintroduction, he approaches her cautiously and, fully aware of the gravity of the situation, tells her that there's always another way. Angela responds dismissively, saying that it's easier to run, and that perhaps it's all they deserve. Confused, James inquires further, trying to figure out why she's including him in her depressing statement, at which point Angela explains that her and James are the same. It's possible that this is just more nihilism on Angela's part, but when you combine it with what she said back in the graveyard, it seems like a further indication, to me anyway, that Angela does indeed know more about the inner workings of Silent Hill than James does, because she's on the right track here. James and Angela have been called to the resort town for far different reasons. What they did before they arrived here is not at all comparable, but as they traverse its fog-covered streets, they are both trying to come to terms with the horrors of their past. You could, of course, include Eddie in this category as well, but we have no evidence that they ever crossed paths, hence why she doesn't mention him here. But back to the conversation itself, James seems to take some mild offense to Angela's words, saying that he's not like her. This is a darkly ironic statement, given that the item you get at the end of this conversation, Angela's knife, unlocks the in-water ending, where James takes his own life by driving into Toluca Lake. Angela then asks James if he's afraid, before recoiling from the mirror and apologizing. James takes the opportunity to change the subject to their shared purpose, their determination to find their missing loved ones, and asks if Angela's found her mother. She says that she hasn't found her yet, prompting James to try and get some more information. Angela says that she's unsure if her mother lived in Blue Creek Apartments, but when James infers that Angela's mother lived in Silent Hill itself, she becomes rather upset and shouts at him, asking how he knows this. James, of course, responds that it's really the only thing that makes sense here. Why would she have come to this New England resort town to look for her mother if she didn't live here? Whether or not Angela's mother actually lived in Silent Hill is open to debate, but most fans have come to the same conclusion as James. Unless it held some specific or special place in her mother's heart, the way it did for Mary, her having lived in the town is the most logical thing one can assume based on Angela's presence here. The sudden shift in tone here emphasizes just how on edge and distrusting of others, particularly men, Angela is. We'll see more of this as the game goes on. Honestly, given her history, it's a wonder that she's able to talk with him like this at all. From there, Angela gets the conversation back on topic and asks James if he's found the person he's looking for in Silent Hill. James replies that he hasn't, and shows her a picture of Mary. It's clearly a gesture to try and get Angela to trust him, to find some common ground in their search for loved ones lost in the fog. But it has the opposite effect. When James admits to Angela that Mary is dead, she becomes incredibly concerned. This could be her distrust of James resurfacing, but I suspect it's more likely her fear that if Mary is gone, that her mother might be too. So she goes to leave, and rejects James's offer to team up, saying that she'd only slow him down. It's interesting that James offers an alliance of sorts here, when he turned down Eddie's offer to do the same thing. But much as I said in my video on him, this has everything to do with their goals. Angela and James are both looking for people. Eddie came to Silent Hill to hide out from the cops, and now that he realizes how dangerous a place it is, he's looking for a way out. As Angela goes to leave, James asks her about the knife, and agrees to hold onto it for her. She admits that if she were to hold onto it, she's not sure what she would do with it. When James goes to take it from her, she recoils from his hand and says,
"I'm sorry. I've been bad. Please don't."
This is an obvious trauma response. We might not know the full scope of what Angela's been through yet, but for her to react to James's hand this way when it was her idea to give him the knife makes it clear that she's been abused. Ultimately, Angela is never able to pass the knife over to James directly, and instead leaves it on the table for him to pick up. This knife, which bears a resemblance to the one Pyramid Head will use to attack the player before they leave the apartment, ends up being one of the game's most important items. As I mentioned earlier, looking at it repeatedly will trigger the in-water ending. Thus, it's not simply inspiration for James's chief tormentor, or simply a gameplay mechanic. This knife potentially draws a parallel between Angela and James, demonstrating just how depressed she's feeling in this moment and how James might end up feeling at the end of the game, depending on your decisions. If the graveyard was our introduction to Angela the person, then this scene is our introduction to her past and her trauma. It prepares us for what's to come by alluding to the abuse she suffered, begins to tie it in with her family, and makes it very clear that we should be prepared for some of Silent Hill 2's heaviest moments whenever Angela's on the screen. Here in 2025, I'm struck by how authentically Angela is portrayed. When I played Silent Hill 2 for the first time back when I was 16, I'd never been around a person in the state Angela is here. Now, it breaks my heart to say that I can no longer count on one hand the number of times, in my capacity as a special education teacher, that I've spoken to a student who is in a similar frame of mind. Knowing firsthand how realistic Angela's characterization is, this scene hits differently. While I can take comfort in the fact that all of those students are doing better now than they were then, having played the original, I already knew that the same wouldn't be true for Angela. The moment this scene was over, it was the end of the night for me. James's third meeting with Angela is a scene that's entirely new to the remake. Very few scenes from the remake are entirely one-to-one. Some lines are worded differently or spoken with a different tone, slightly altering the game's narrative direction or the meaning behind certain phrases. But this third encounter with Angela is not in the original at all. is an entirely new creation by Bloober Team. I believe there are 3 key reasons why this scene was created, but we'll get into them in a minute. First, let's break down what happens here between James and Angela. Our protagonist approaches Angela cautiously, the memory of what happened last time he was with her clearly on his mind, and asks if she's feeling better. She responds that Silent Hill is different than she remembers, which is definitely the case for James as well. When he was last here with Mary, the town was surely a more hospitable place. Angela then despairs, saying that she doesn't think her mother is here any longer, and that even if she were, she wouldn't want to see her anyway. These lines help to solidify something that's been hinted at in the previous 2 conversations with Angela, something that will continue to come up as we progress to the end of the game, that Angela is always a few steps ahead of James on her Silent Hill journey. Back in the graveyard, she had already seen the monsters, or at least experienced the town's hazards firsthand, long before James discovered the roads to nowhere or fought a single mannequin. In the apartments, she was a low point that James doesn't really experience until Maria is killed by Pyramid Head for the first time. And here at this statue, she's beginning to come around to the truth, that her relationship with her mother was far more complicated than she remembers. The same is true for James and the woman he's looking for, but we won't find out about that for several more in-game hours, again positioning Angela as a character who's ahead of James on her psychological odyssey through the fog. James then tells Angela that he's happy to see her, a comment that surprises her, until he clarifies that he means that he's happy to see her alive, considering what they both experienced in the town so far. She then decides to get going on her way, and turns down James's offer of an alliance for a second time. Before she leaves, James asks her if she's seen a little girl, Laura, at which point Angela looks off into the darkness, horrified by someone or something. I suspect that she's seeing either her brother, her father, or one of the monsters she's been contending with here in Silent Hill. James reaches out to help her, but she responds just like she did back in the apartment, by fearfully evading his hand. With that, Angela runs away, and it's the last we see of her for several hours. Now that we've broken down the scene itself, let's move on to our earlier question. Why did Bloober Team add this scene, which doesn't appear in the original, into the game? The first reason, I suspect, comes down to practical matters. The remake is longer than the original. To be exact, it's roughly twice as long. The remake takes about 16 hours to complete, while the original takes around 8. In light of this extended running time, the developers likely feared that the player might forget about Angela between the apartment scene and the Abstract Daddy boss fight. And as we'll see in a few minutes, the Abstract Daddy boss fight is by far one of the most disturbing and unsettling scenes that's ever been put into a video game. It's one of the reasons this essay took so long to put together. I really dreaded looking back at that footage. So, from a design perspective, I think this scene was included to help bridge the gap between these 2 appearances, to remind the player of Angela's trauma and who she's looking for in Silent Hill. I do think this scene accomplishes that. We see evidence of her abuse in her responses to James, her reaction to his hand, and she talks about her mother before something forces her to run away. On that note, it also gives us a closer look at what Angela's experiencing on her Silent Hill journey. Again, in the original, we don't get an update on Angela's search for her mother until essentially the end of the game. Here, we find out that she's losing hope about finding her. And in doing so, as we discussed earlier, it really establishes this idea that she's a few steps ahead of James. This was present in the original, but this scene helps clarify it. We also learn that she has tormentors of her own chasing after her. We only ever see one of Angela's monsters, the aforementioned Abstract Daddy, but she no doubt has others, one so terrifying that it forced her to retreat at the end of the scene. And finally, the scene shows a softer side of James, which is crucial to the remake's portrayal of him. You're welcome to disagree with me on this one, but in my opinion, it's inarguable that the remake's James Sunderland, portrayed by Luke Roberts, has a slightly warmer personality than the original's James Sunderland, portrayed by Guy Seehee. To borrow Mary's own words, remake James is less surly and shows more of the qualities that made her happy before her illness than original James. Don't get me wrong, it doesn't change the fact that he's a complex, morally gray character who committed a terrible crime that was, even in the best possible interpretation available, an unplanned mercy killing, and at worst, a murder he committed for selfish reasons. In no way does this differing portrayal absolve what he did, but there's no question in my mind that Bloober Team did this intentionally. As for why they did it, I think it all ties back to the loop theory, but we'll talk more about that when James gets his own video in August. Regardless of the reason, we see the softer side of James's personality here. He seems genuine in his interactions with Angela. It really does come off like he's happy to see her alive, and it really does seem like he wants to team up with her to find their way out of Silent Hill together. I'd be interested in hearing a contrarian point of view on this, but I find his words and intentions to be rather authentic in this scene, which helps with Bloober Team's portrayal of James as someone who's traumatized and sorrowful, but capable of being the person Mary writes about in her letters, rather than the original, which sets him up as a character who's aloof and running from all of the selfish reasons that inspired him to kill Mary in the game's darkest endings. With that said, it's important to note that his personality is only slightly softer. There is a clear limit to the kindness he's capable of showing. As the dialogue indicates, he's happy to see Angela alive. He's not happy to see Angela herself. Warmer he may be, but he's not a friendly person or an altruist. Still, even a slightly softer personality, if you ask me, can really change your perspective on this game. But again, that's a topic for James's video. Our next scene with Angela is the most difficult one to talk about. For that reason, from here on out, I recommend proceeding with caution. I'm assuming that most of this video's audience is familiar with Silent Hill 2's content and knows what's about to happen. But it's not lost on me that this channel has a core audience that watches all my videos regardless of the topic. So please, if you're in that category and don't know what happens next, then proceed with caution. Don't hesitate to turn off this video if need be. While navigating the labyrinth, James finds Angela in a room quite similar to the apartment he found her in earlier. It's here that a combination of environmental storytelling, dialogue, and boss design paints a horrifying picture of the hell Angela experienced as a child. She was abused, first by her father, then by her brother. The appearance of the abstract daddy, by far Silent Hill 2's most grotesque and unsettling creature, makes the specific nature of her abuse obvious. The ensuing boss fight is one of the most challenging the game has to offer. The abstract daddy is relentless, at times seemingly unstoppable. No matter what the player does, or how many bullets you strike him with, he just keeps on attacking. Even walls don't hold him back. This, no doubt, is a reflection of how Angela felt as a child. Like nothing she could do would stop her father and her brother from continuing to harm her. With the abstract daddy dead, Angela takes a few minutes to exact some well-deserved vengeance on the horrifying creature. James tries to calm her down, which serves as a reminder of the fact that even with the remake's softer portrayal, this is still a character who often doesn't know how to read a room and struggles to empathize with the emotions and experiences of others. Much as I said earlier, the softer side of his personality is limited. James tries to console Angela, but she wants nothing to do with it, and accuses him of having ulterior motives for helping her. This, combined with what was just revealed to us, sheds light on why Angela has reacted to James the way she has to this point in the game. When he's gotten physically close to her, she's had a trauma response due to her fear that he's going to abuse her, and when he's offered to help or been kind to her, she's been suspicious of him. As terrible as it is, abused people often become a target for other abusers, and reading between the lines here, it's likely that growing up, other men in Angela's life, friends, boyfriends, classmates, tried to take advantage of her. So when James tries to calm her down, she responds with learned suspicion. If all other men in her life had ulterior motives, then why wouldn't James? After attempting to get James to admit what she believes to be his true intentions, Angela states her own trauma, in no uncertain terms, and breaks down. It's difficult to watch, to see her so plainly say what she's been through, hit the floor, and shed tears as she calls James a disgusting pig and express how much she hates him. She's also talking about her father in this moment, of course, but these lines are said directly to James. Now, shifting gears to the scene as a whole, in the Silent Hill games that are more focused on the town's psychological aspects as opposed to the cult-focused entries, characters are pulled to the town due to their traumatic past, because of the horrible things that happened to them, the horrible things they did, or some combination of the two. Upon their arrival to Silent Hill, much of their traumatic past is obscured from them, deliberately masked by the town's powers so they can be forced to confront it. Think back to our first encounter with Angela. She thought her father was in Silent Hill, but didn't seem to remember the abuse she'd suffered at his hands. By our second encounter with her, she's in a deep depression, and by the third, she's actively running from someone, and clearly beginning to recall her past. All of this culminates here, where she fully spells out what she went through during her hellish childhood. In this respect, and again keeping in mind that Angela is always a few steps ahead of James, I'd argue that this moment for Angela is intended to be a parallel to James watching the videotape and admitting to Lara that he killed Mary. Both are scenes where the character confronts their traumatic past by plainly stating what happened to them, as Angela does here, or what they did, as is the case with James. It's brilliant juxtaposition, these two crucial scenes, and further illustrates the way the developers have consistently used Angela's story to illuminate James's. And from there, that's what the game continues to do, as the topic shifts from Angela's past to the one James is still hiding from. James tells Angela that he doesn't want to hurt her, he just wants to get Mary back. Once more, there's that limit to his softer side. Angela's the one breaking down, and yet he's more focused on himself and his needs. Angela then begins to deliver a series of remarkably on-the-nose statements, saying that Mary was only James's for a time, and that he didn't want her around anymore. James denies this, but Angela pursues the matter, and accuses him of finding someone else, a comment that infuriates James. In doing so, Angela exposes another facet of James's personality, his capacity for anger. As we progress to the end of the game and its revelations, it's important that the players see that he can be like this, that he can be surly, prone to rage. James's anger diffuses Angela, and after a moment, she leaves to take care of the last piece of unfinished business she has here in Silent Hill, finding her mother. As she departs, James starts to say that he would never something, but he doesn't finish the statement. This scene really helps drive home the way the developers consistently use other characters, Lara, Eddie, and now Angela, to paint a clearer picture of James's character, and to continue to hint at the crime he's buried deep in his subconscious. As mentioned earlier, everything Angela says to James is very on the nose. No matter how you interpret James, he did have selfish reasons for wanting Mary gone, though the extent of how much those selfish reasons influence his actions depends heavily on which ending you prefer. And he did, in a sense, find someone else, Maria. But again, how much value he places on her also depends heavily on which ending you prefer. All of this is to say that there is an inarguable truth to Angela's words, something you can see in James's stunned reaction as she leaves the room. I don't think she has any kind of hidden knowledge of what James did to Mary or anything along those lines. Rather, I suspect that these statements are projection, her evaluating James's relationship with Mary through the lens of her own trauma, and in so doing, manages to strike more resonant chords than she'll ever know. It's such brilliant writing, highlighted by the tremendous voice acting and motion capture work. We're exposed to Angela's trauma, we learn more about James, and piece by piece, we step closer to the truth, to Silent Hill 2's final act. Before we proceed, there is more environmental storytelling in this chapter I've yet to cover. In one of the rooms before the Abstract Daddy boss battle, you can find a blood-soaked newspaper. Much of it is obscured, but what we do see reveals that before the events of the game, Angela's father was murdered by someone wielding a knife. Obviously, the killer was Angela herself, and it's possible that she did so with the very same knife she gave to James back in the apartment. Some suspect that she also killed her brother, who, as mentioned, also abused her, but we'll get into that theory later on. Regardless, it helps us make sense of Angela's past and what she was doing before she arrived in Silent Hill. When she said back in the graveyard that she thought her father and brother were in town, her past was obscured to her, much as we discussed earlier. James's final encounter with Angela takes place in Lakeview Hotel. I covered this in my Silent Hill 2 Ending Explained video, but this burned down husk of the place is the real-world version of the hotel. The fog-covered one is James's otherworld version of the hotel. Masahiro Ito has explained this extensively a few times, and I'll link his comments below. In any case, James finds Angela in a burning staircase. It's important to note here, as we'll see later on, that the flames are only visible to Angela and the player. James himself can't see them. At first, Angela thinks that James is her mother, the only member of her family she's yet to find during her Silent Hill journey. This implies that she did end up finding her brother. If you look at the walls of this scene, you'll find not only one, but two dead abstract daddies. The common interpretation for this is that one represents Angela's father and that the other represents her brother. When she encountered her brother's abstract daddy is unclear, but it's possible that she fought him at some point after James killed the one that represents her father. After touching James on the shoulder, Angela realizes that James isn't her mother, just James, another soul lost in Silent Hill's fog. She then falls back on the stairs, upset. James apologizes and says that Angela was right earlier when she said that the people they're looking for, Mary and her mother, aren't really here. In response, Angela thanks James for all the help he's given her, and then reveals that even her mother is responsible for her past trauma. At some point, she said that Angela deserved what happened to her. It's a horrible thing for Angela's mother to have said, and a heartbreaking admission that makes what she's been through even worse. All along, with the desperate and determined way Angela seemed to be looking for her mother, it appeared that, perhaps, her mother was her peace in all the tragedy, the person who tried to help and protect her. But that's not the case at all. With statements like this, Angela's mother diminished her and enabled her abusers. James tells Angela that what her mother said isn't true, which prompts Angela to taunt him with a monologue that is rather similar in context to what she said in their last encounter when she made all of those statements about Mary. She asks James if he intends to save her, to heal all her pain, and when he says nothing, she again dismisses his words and then asks him to return her knife. Given what we know about this knife, that it might have been used to kill her father, and that when Angela had it earlier, she was contemplating taking her own life, it's obvious what's on her mind here. She's thinking about ending it all once again. Then she asks if he intends on saving it for himself, a nod to how it can be used in the in-water ending. James refuses to turn over the knife, but Angela says it doesn't change anything, which effectively confirms that she does intend to take her own life, with or without the knife. She then begins to walk up the stairs, at which point James comments on how hot the room is. It's here that Angela says one of her most well-known lines, that for her, it's always like this. Most folks have interpreted this to mean that just as Eddie's Silent Hill is cold and James's is waterlogged, Angela's is on fire. I'd argue that flames are a fitting analogy for the kind of deep-seated trauma that Angela has experienced. For victims of severe burns, the scars don't go away. They're always there, the same way that the kinds of horrible childhood trauma and abuse that Angela suffered at the hands of her father, brother, and mother are a constant presence in her life, always on her mind and influencing her every word and action. How Angela's story ends is open to interpretation, but the most common theory is that she takes her own life at the top of these stairs, possibly by succumbing to the flames that have always surrounded her. It's a tragic ending to a tragic life, though I must admit that I do suspect that this interpretation is the correct one. I'd like to propose an alternative theory, one that at least provides the possibility for hope. As mentioned earlier, Angela is always a few steps ahead of James on her Silent Hill journey. At the end of the game, James ascends a staircase to reach his final confrontation with her, a monstrous representation of either Mary or Maria, depending on your ending. If Angela and James's arcs do indeed mirror each other in this sense, then maybe something similar happens to her after the camera cuts back to our protagonist. Perhaps what's awaiting Angela at the top of the staircase isn't a fiery end, but rather her own final confrontation with the loved one she's been looking for all along, her mother. From there, maybe Angela engages in a boss fight of sorts with a monstrous representation of her mother, and receives one of many possible endings. Succumbing to the flames is likely one of these, but perhaps another is a bedside conversation with her mother, similar to James's bedside conversation with Mary in the Leave ending. And perhaps the revelations contained in this bedside conversation would be enough to help Angela begin to heal and escape from Silent Hill. You're welcome to call this overly hopeful. I won't be offended, and I'll be the first to admit that the simplest interpretation is likely the correct one. But Angela does take her own life at the top of these stairs. Her dialogue in the moments leading up to it make it perfectly clear that she is thinking about it. But if James, who killed his terminally ill wife, can get catharsis and a chance to start down the road to redemption, as he does in the Leave ending, then I don't think it's wrong to hope, just hope, that it might be possible for Angela, the most innocent of the three characters lost in the fog, to receive a more positive ending of her own. All of that, of course, is just speculation. But the fact that we can have these discussions at all speaks to the quality of Silent Hill's writing, how they portray Angela's journey as a mirror to James's, how honestly and authentically they portray her trauma, and in the process, created one of the most realistic representations of an abused person in all of video games. And that's what makes Angela so important to Silent Hill 2. Thanks for watching. Huge thanks to my Silent Hill collaborators Mathias T. Solice, and David Peppiatt, who allowed me to use their covers from various Silent Hill games for this video. To check out all three of these amazing artists, just follow the links down below, in the description box. Special shout out to the caretaker who designed the thumbnail image for this video. Big shout out to all my Silver and Gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Gustavo Balabi, Little Caesar, Reed, Pathonian, Anna Novikova, and Sean Bobby, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time, and go Birds!